Concentric rings.
Yeah, so the complexity increases with the magnitude of the impact event, and you find
Because the
that in
Chicxulub
every-
crater is underwater, this is a good place to get a sense of what happened when the asteroid hit. This is Meteor Crater, Arizona. 50,000 years ago, a meteorite about the size of a house streaked out of the sky and slammed into the Earth. It triggered an explosion greater than 20 million tons of TNT and created this, a crater 550 feet deep and 3/4 of a mile across. Room enough for 20 football fields and more than 2 million spectators. Impressive, isn't it? But remember, the asteroid that caused the KT event was the size of Mount Everest. So to visualize the crater that it made, we need something a lot bigger, like the Grand Canyon. This is the south rim. From here to the other side is 16 miles. But even that's not big enough. The asteroid that caused the KT extinction blasted a crater 8 times as large, 125 miles across, from here to the gaming tables in Las Vegas. And when the asteroid hit, it went deep as well. It's a long climb from here to the bottom of the canyon, about 1.25 miles. But according to Walter Alvarez, the asteroid made a crater that was a staggering 20 miles deep upon impact, then quickly filled in. How do scientists know all this? The evidence has come from a variety of sources. Seismic studies revealed the enormous ring-like shape of the crater. Thousands of core samples uncovered rocks with traces of having been altered by a high-impact collision. And computer modeling that calculated the explosion it would have taken to create the Chicxulub crater. But Walter Alvarez's discovery of what caused the extinction of the ancient dinosaurs is not without controversy. His asteroid scenario is at the center of an ongoing debate, with opposing scientists offering. One theory argues that intense volcanic eruptions poisoned the Earth's atmosphere and killed the ancient dinosaurs before the KT event ever occurred. But Alvarez's theory has withstood the challenge. So this has been almost 25 years, or about 25 years.
It's about, yeah.
This theory has stood that test.
Oh, the theories got stronger and stronger.
Because scientists from many disciplines have investigated the evidence, from paleontologists to oceanographers, and their research overwhelmingly supports Walter Alvarez's discovery that the KT asteroids was responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs.
Today, the extinction of the ancient dinosaurs is taken for granted. But for centuries, the world had no inkling that the fabled creatures ever existed. Dinosaur fossils had been turning up since ancient times, a jaw here, a claw there, but no one had a clue who or what these enormous bones belonged to. But all that began to change in the early part of the 19th century. The discovery of the dinosaur unfolded in a series of small but significant fossil finds that first brought the ancient reptiles to the attention of the scientific world. In 1822, a naturalist gave the name iguanodon to the creature whose large, chisel-shaped teeth were found protruding from a piece of sandstone in the south of England. Around the same time, Megalosaurus was named by a professor of geology after some of its bones were unearthed in a London quarry. Because so little evidence existed to prove that these reptiles had ever roamed the Earth, scientists relied heavily on their imaginations to interpret the anatomies of the giant creatures. Often they described them as oversized versions of living lizards. But with each new fossil discovery came greater understanding. By 1849, the fossils of 9 completely different reptiles had been discovered, and a British anatomist named Richard Owen created a new scientific category for their identification. He dubbed them dinosaur, meaning terrible lizard. To the world of the 1800s, their discovery was revolutionary.
It helped give birth to the science of paleontology. And because these creatures were obviously extinct, the discovery stirred debate about the history of life on Earth.
For 150 million years, dinosaurs dominated life on Earth. But when they were shown the exit door, it made room for other species to evolve and dominate. 65 million years later, here we are. See, if the ancient dinosaurs hadn't died out, you have to figure we wouldn't be here. So how did we all get here in the first place? Where on Earth did life emerge?
Our next great discovery offered a compelling possibility for the kitchen of creation.
Think of a volcano, and the image that comes to mind is a mountain, miles high, with steam rising out of its crater. But the volcano here at Yellowstone is a little bit different. We're standing on it. Nearly all of Yellowstone's 2 million acres sit on top of an enormous underground supervolcano, 40 miles wide. Its crater is here, just below the surface, and down there is molten rock, the source of intense heat that powers Old Faithful.
And the simmering volcano fuels the hot springs here as well, a cradle to some of the most primitive microbes on the planet. Bathed in a primordial soup, incubated by volcanic steam, the organisms flourish. This led some scientists to speculate that a setting with conditions like these here at Yellowstone could have been where life first started. And our next great discovery demonstrated how it might have happened. In 1953, a doctoral student named Stanley Miller conducted a series of experiments to reproduce in his lab the same conditions that had probably existed on primeval Earth. Water, but no oxygen in the air. An atmosphere teeming with a mix of gases. Sulfur and methane, hydrogen and ammonia. Miller started by filling an enclosed container with water. Then he added the mix of gases. To replicate the effect of the sun, he heated the mixture with a Bunsen burner. To simulate lightning bolts, he jolted the concoction with bursts of electricity. He waited several days before analyzing the liquid in the container. The results were astonishing. The liquid contained organic compounds, essential building blocks for creating proteins, which play a vital role in the biochemical spark that starts life.
So what did Stanley Miller discover? While he didn't create life in the lab, he created the potential for life, and that's significant. It meant with the right raw materials and the right conditions, life could happen anywhere.
However, there's no shortage of theories. Some scientists have even speculated that the life-building proteins that Stanley Miller created in his lab could have arrived aboard a comet or asteroid from deep space, seeding the Earth. Or perhaps the answer lies at the bottom of the ocean, with our next great discovery. The Pacific Ocean, 250 miles off the coast of the Galapagos Islands. In 1977, a deep-sea submarine descended over 8,000 feet. Its mission? To investigate hydrothermal activity on the ocean floor. Marine explorer Robert Ballard was aboard. He detected a dramatic change in the ocean's temperature.
You know, we were not expecting what we found. We were expecting to find water, and we had a camera inside the vehicle, but it was just taking pictures, so we didn't know what we had till we came back. And we brought it up to the surface, and we processed the film, and we knew the spot where the temperature spike was, and it was like going to Disneyland. Probably one of the biggest biological discoveries ever made on Earth was made that day.
Ballard and his team were the first to see it, face to face. Hydrothermal vents. Immense chimney-like structures, several stories high, spewing hot water geysers, black with minerals and nutrients. The temperature around these deep-sea vents was a scorching 760 degrees Fahrenheit. And then an astonishing sight. Life, thriving without sunlight, a biological community never seen before. An exotic garden of marine life. Species without eyes. Others resembling Triassic-era fossils, over 200 million years old.
What we totally were blown away by were these giant tube worms. Some of them 8, 9, 10 feet tall. And when you cut them, they bled human-like blood. I mean, when the submarine landed, there was a squish, and red blood came up around all the portholes. And that's how eerie it was. And then to find these extremely unusual creatures living in this oasis. It had no relationship to the normal life of the deep sea. And yet here they were living in this toxic water. But yet these creatures were thriving on it. And then when we dissected, I remember we took one of these clams, and we opened it up in the first place. Whew, as soon as we opened it up, it stunk.
It was full of hydrogen sulfur.
Horrible smell.
Rotten eggs.
Yeah. And we opened it up, and then we looked, and it didn't look. It looked like beef. It was red, bright red, and it didn't have an anatomy of a clam. It was like, what happened to the clam? Someone had taken over its body, and that something was a bacterium, a tiny bacterium that had figured out over eons of time how to duplicate photosynthesis in the dark chemically through a process we now call chemosynthesis. And that was the discovery, that there was another life system on Earth that did not go by the book that you and I read, that was not living off the energy of the sun, but was living off the energy of the Earth itself. And that really opens up the ballgame.
I'll say.
And these bacterium, we now think are the largest mass of living things on Earth.
That they're in the rocks, everywhere.
In the whole mountain range.
Under the ocean.
If you added up all the people and all the living things on land and add up all the creatures in the ocean and the few things in the sky, and you got a number, so many tons, there's more tons of biomass. We used to just think, you know, the insects ruled the earth.
Yeah.
Wrong. These bacterium.
So where are these vents?
All over the earth. Imagine a baseball with a seam on it. That seam begins beneath the polar ice caps, goes down through the Atlantic, into the Indian Ocean, across the Pacific. It runs around the Earth for 42,000 miles. It's the largest feature on Earth, the mid-ocean ridge, and it's underlain by literally tens of thousands of magma chambers.
Is that where life began, in the hot springs?
Well, that's what people are now thinking. The biology books that we were reading have now been thrown away.
Yeah.
And they're
when I
writing
grew
new
up,
ones.
everything, you had to be on the surface.
That's right, and you had this soup and the lightning bolt hit it and you formed all sorts of amino acids and things like that. But now what we think is that the hydrothermal vents may have been the site of life on Earth. It's also given us a new prospecting tool for searching for it elsewhere with our own solar system. We're now looking at a moon of Jupiter called Europa, which we think has an ocean. We think it has underwater volcanoes, and there should be life down there. The question is, how smart are their clams?
Did hydrothermal vents give birth to the first primitive microbes on Earth? Perhaps. But one thing is certain. Their discovery challenged long-held beliefs about the conditions necessary for creating life. And once life happened, there was no stopping it. In the summer of 1909, Charles Walcott, who at that time was secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, was doing some field work in British Columbia. And he and his wife were riding along a mountain trail, and the story goes that one of their mules lost a shoe. Now, when Walcott bent down to retrieve it, he came across a piece of shale, a rock. And it was ordinary looking at first, but when the sunlight hit it, it shimmered like silver. And he looked closely, and there was a pattern, a fossil. So when they did some more exploring to find out where this one piece of rock had come from, they came across something that no one had ever seen before. A vast deposit, a quarry of fossils from about 500 million years ago, the Cambrian period. Over the next 7 years, Walcott excavated the area, eventually bringing back over 65,000 specimens. Walcott called his discovery the Burgess Shale. Douglas Irwin is curator of the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History.
Like dinosaurs, you find the bones.
You find the bones,
But you never
don't
find-
find the intestines and the stomach and the eyes and
Never,
things like
hardly
that.
ever,
The
yeah.
Burgess Shale, we find all those bits and pieces. So let me take you into the
This is the secret room.
collections. Yep. So this is a room that we keep a lot of the more important fossils, trilobites and the ammonites, and then the Burgess Shale. That's what I want to show you. We have the part and the counterpart here. So originally, this would have been one piece like this. Somebody hit it on the side with a hammer, and it split along the middle of the fossil.
Oh, wow.
So this is a Shea. A Shea is an onychophoran worm. When they move from the oceans to land, we have no idea. But you can see the legs
Yeah,
down
and there's
along
some
there.
sort of a
Little
antenna or
up on-
something.
and if you move that back and forth like that, you can see shiny bits just at the end of the legs, and those are the toenails.
Of course they are. The fossils that Walcott discovered were remarkably preserved, a vivid snapshot of a time when ancient life on Earth was dominated by curious underwater creatures.
This is the big predator of the Cambrian. In China, some of these were probably 3 feet long to 6 feet long. It's probably a cousin of the arthropods, insects, and crabs, and things like that. The mouth actually sort of opened up, and as those rotated closed, those would crunch the carapace.
Like the beak of an octopus.
Yeah. This is Opabinia. This is
Opabinia.
Opabinia. It's one of my favorites, probably because it's just such a weird animal. It's got 5 eyes on stalks. It's got this long trunk-like thing with a claw at one end.
It's just like somebody's just making it up.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of like a Chinese menu. You know, you take one part from column A and one part from column B, and you wind up with something like this. But there's nothing to compare with this today, the 5 eyes and the
wacky
claws of
single claw,
Opabinia.
The site of the Burgess Shale was created by a sudden and violent act of nature. An underwater mud flow struck fast. A landslide of sediment crashed down, burying everything in its path. They remained entombed for hundreds of millions of years.
505 million years ago, life was really boring. There was a lot of microbial slime around, but nothing terribly complicated. And then we begin to get the first animals diversifying into this whole wide range of things.
So far, the discovery of the Burgess Shale has revealed an estimated 170 different species of ancient marine life, an astonishing explosion of multi-celled body types. Astonishing because for billions of years, the Earth had been dominated by one-celled creatures. For many scientists, the diversity of the Burgess Shale fossils is evidence of a dramatic shift in the evolution of life on Earth, the evolutionary equivalent of the Big Bang.
The Burgess Shale is this wonderful window into this big bang of animal life, where very rapidly we get the production of all these different architectures, all these different ways of making a living in this whole new ecosystem. It's much better than playing with dinosaur
Why do you think it's
models.
better than playing with dinosaurs?
Well, these are much more fascinating. I mean, dinosaurs aren't really that long ago, and they turned into birds, and they're fine.
Stay at the office.
But I mean, Opabinia is a much cooler animal than Tyrannosaurus rex. It's just that 5-year-old kids don't know it yet. Even Spielberg and Lucas wouldn't have come up with Opabinia. That's why they're so cool. We'd never know they existed without the Burgess Shale.
Not all the great discoveries started with uncovering a piece of physical evidence. There wasn't always a place to explore or a fossil to find. Our next great discovery started with an idea.
Early in the 18th century, scientists were just coming to grips with the idea that a species could become extinct, it could disappear. And that was sort of a sideshow. The main attraction was the classification and naming of all these newly discovered types of plants and animals. Now, back then, they didn't really have a good system for the classification and naming of living things, so a scientist might find a new type of living thing and then just name it whatever he wished, making up some unwieldy Latin word. A botanist named Carl Linnaeus straightened things out a bit when he came up with his system for classifying every living thing. Scientists at the time thought it was genius. Linnaeus himself called it the greatest achievement in science. Well, we still use a lot of the Linnaean traditions today, including naming things by their genus and species, the binomial system. You and I are still called Homo sapiens, for example. Now, the Linnaean system was based on the sex organs of plants. So one of his contemporaries, a guy named Johann Siegesbeck, thought this was immoral and offensive. So Linnaeus named a particular plant Siegesbeckia, because it was a stinky weed.
Today, the science of classifying species has expanded beyond the Linnaean system. With information from DNA sequencing and analysis of molecular data, scientists have a new understanding of relationships among species. As a result, modern classification systems advocate categorizing species based on how they evolve, how they fit in the tree of life, a concept that Linnaeus never considered because the theory of evolution by natural selection had yet to be developed. But when it was, many would consider it the greatest discovery in the history of the world. In the 1820s, surgery was a grisly affair. There was no anesthesia, and young medical students were forced to watch and learn.
The young man who walked out that day was Charles Darwin. The ordeal of the operating room was too much for him. Over his father's objections, he quit medical school to pursue his dream of becoming a naturalist.
Darwin was hired as a naturalist aboard the British Admiralty's HMS Beagle, which embarked on an expedition to survey and map coastal waters around the world. The Beagle was at sea for 5 years. To Darwin, it seemed an eternity. He shared a small cabin with the captain, with whom he had several disagreements, including the story of creation.
Darwin.
While the captain held to the Bible's account of creation, Darwin believed that the earth had changed slowly over millions of years. It was a debate that would follow Darwin for the rest of his life.
The British government paid for this?
No, actually, Darwin's father paid for his voyage and also paid for an assistant to come with Darwin and help him skin the specimens and prepare the crates for shipment. He worked in a little poop deck where he had all his specimens, just about something like this.
The Beagle made stopovers in ports from Australia to South America, including 36 days in the Galapagos Islands. And Darwin made the most of it. He recorded extensive observations about the indigenous plants and wildlife. He collected and preserved thousands of specimens for study. For years after the voyage, Darwin would recall the observations he made while aboard the Beagle.
It was not until 1837, a couple of years after he returned from the Galapagos, that he opened his first species notebook. And he asked himself the question, very ambitious question for a man in his late 20s. What are the laws of life?
Is this Darwin's whole point?
It was Darwin's whole point, to try to find laws operating in the natural world similar to the laws that physicists and chemists had found in inorganic nature.
Darwin's search to understand the laws of nature took shape as he studied the animals on the Galapagos Islands. Of special interest to him were the physical differences within a certain species. For example, the finches on the Galapagos had different shaped beaks. They varied according to the environments where the finches lived. Some had beaks that were hard and blunt, ideal for hammering open crab shells. Others had beaks that were more tapered and suited for hunting and pecking among rocks. The difference was puzzling. As Darwin analyzed it, he began thinking about how the struggle to survive was the driving force behind all life. If a species is to thrive in its environment, it has to evolve or perish. With this simple yet powerful insight, history was made. Darwin discovered the mechanism that made evolution work, the process of natural selection. Darwin, the first guy really to come up with this, right? What was his special or particular insight?
He was the first to come up with a specific mechanism, that is natural selection. He was the first to popularize the idea of deep time, millions of years that this process involved. He was the first to popularize the idea of the tree of life, in which we're related to all living things. The great geneticist Dobzhansky once said, nothing in biology makes sense without evolution. Because biology today is evolutionary biology. That's what biology is all about, and has been all about since 1859. How we got here, what kind of creatures we are, how we're related to everything else in nature. It's been established we are all part of one great tree of life, plugged into a bloodline, to a DNA that links us to every living thing on Earth. That's not metaphorical. That's literal.
Why did it take Darwin 20 years to publish his ideas?
He knew there would be a storm of religious protest. His own wife was not happy that he was going to write things that were incompatible with the Bible. She wrote him a letter when they were first married saying, I hope that your science will not lead us to spend eternity in two very different places.
Wow.
And she was seriously concerned about this. Plus, he was trying to build up a mountain of evidence that would be incontrovertible.
Finally, in 1859, Darwin published his theory of natural selection. His book, Origin of Species, is considered one of the greatest books ever written. People talk about the theory of evolution, right? But Darwin was the guy that said, well, there isn't any absolute truth here.
Darwin, being one of the first modern thinkers, tried to tell us that science is provisional. It changes.
What do you mean by provisional?
It means it's the best truth you have at the moment. And when you get more data that can't be explained that way, then you have to get a new theory. So it's not an eternal truth. It's a provisional truth. It changes. And he did not want evolution to be accepted as a dogma or a creed. He would have been the first to say, throw it out if you got something better.
But we didn't find anything better.
We didn't find anything better. In fact, what we found was that entire new sciences that were undreamed of in Darwin's day have come up through the study of molecular genetics and DNA, which reinforce the idea of evolution, so that now, everywhere we look today, we see something that came from Darwin in science.
Darwin's theory of evolution changed everything. His assertion that humans evolved from ancient ancestors in Africa challenged traditional religious beliefs and motivated scientists of many disciplines to begin exploring the theory. It's one thing to claim that humans evolved from African apes. It would be another thing to prove it.
In 1974, anthropologist Donald Johanson and his team were working in Ethiopia when they came upon the partial remains of an ancient hominid, a species considered to be part of the family that includes humankind. Because the skeleton had once stood about 3 feet tall, Johanson believed it was that of a young female. He named her Lucy, after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Despite her fragmented remains, Lucy had remarkable secrets to share about her life.
Oh, wow. Does this fit? No.
At the time of her discovery, the most complete hominid skeleton ever found was less than 100,000 years old. Lucy was an estimated 3.2 million years old. Dr. Ken Mowbray is an anthropologist with the American Museum of Natural History.
Yeah, Lucy really shook up the family tree, so to speak.
Why was she such a big deal?
She was a big deal for many reasons. First of all, her skeleton was 40% complete.
40%, that's complete to you guys?
You know, in fossil terms, that's a lot of fossil bones for an individual. Something even more important that makes her really significant is that we believe that she was bipedal. I have a cast here of the pelvis of Lucy, the left side. The pelvis sits right like this in the human body. It is short and it is broad. If you were to look at a chimpanzee, a gorilla, or an orangutan, their blades are really narrow and really tall. The blade of Lucy, and like ours, extends outwardly. This allows the transference of weight if you were going to walk on 2 limbs. And so from this pelvis alone, we think that Lucy moved about the landscape as an habitual biped.
Like you and me.
Exactly. She was walking around essentially like us.
Lucy's discovery sparked a debate about whether she could be the long sought-after missing link connecting apes with the first humans. But some anthropologists, like Dr. Mowbray, believe that the missing link is a myth. Now, for a long time, people thought there was a link between chimpanzees and humans. And when I look at chimpanzees and humans, I can see where you'd get that idea, but it's not that simple, right?
Absolutely. Lucy really opened up the world in the late 1970s to have a better understanding that there wasn't this linear progression of evolution, especially with humans, that it was much more diversified. With Lucy and subsequent fossil finds, we really know that this tree of life is much more like a bush. There's a lot of experimentation going on, a lot of dead ends.
Regardless of whose ancient footsteps we may be walking in, there's one remarkable set of footprints without dispute. In 1978, anthropologist Mary Leakey and her team were working in Letoli, Tanzania, when they made one of the greatest discoveries in the study of human origins. A pair of fossilized footprints, old enough and small enough to have been made by 2 hominids, much like Lucy.
The significance is that, one, that they're dated at 3.6 million years ago. Those are the oldest human ancestor footprints that we have, that we know of today. More importantly, I think, it records behavior. Their footprints let us know that they were walking bipedally. There were no fingerprints, there were no knuckle marks around the imprints of their feet. And on top of that, we know that they were in groups. They were social. They weren't just walking by themselves.
The remarkable discovery of the Letoli footprints was made possible by a series of natural events that occurred 3.7 million years ago. A volcano erupted, covering the landscape with a thin layer of ash. As rain fell, the ash became thick like wet cement, and soon was covered by animal tracks, birds, a rabbit, and then the footprints of 2 hominids. Eventually, another volcanic eruption blanketed the spot with more ash, a protective layer that preserved the prints as they hardened. They remained hidden until Mary Leakey revealed them to the world. The 20th century will be remembered as the golden age of human fossil discoveries. But so far, the greatest discovery of the 21st century occurred in Central Africa in 2002. A research team led by Michel Brunet unearthed 6 skull fragments of an ancient hominid they nicknamed Tumai, meaning hope of life. The skull revealed features never seen before, an ape-like cranium, but with teeth far more human-like. So far, at 7 million years old, Tumai is the oldest hominid fossil ever found, more than twice as old as Lucy, raising significant new questions about the diversity of life among ancient hominids.
So what's the significance of the skull from Chad, Tumai?
And it's telling us a couple different things. One, it's telling us there's a lot of diversity in the human fossil record. There's a lot of branches on this so-called tree that end up as just evolutionary experiments at best. We, luckily, ended up on this little twig of a really diverse family tree. The last significance of the Tumai skull is that it's telling us to step back, wave a huge yellow caution flag, and reevaluate the fossils that we already have in the human family tree and reassess what it means to be a hominid.
What does it mean to you to be a hominid?
Well, I look at being a hominid in 2 different ways. Hominids lack the ability to remain bored. There was a group of primates out there that had no ability to just sit there and do nothing. And this, coupled with upright habitual bipedalism, this is what a hominid is to me.
Bipedal and unable to remain bored.
Yeah.
I'm a hominid, doggone it.
Oh, absolutely. We're hominids.
It's a fact of life on Earth. Extinction happens. Eventually, every species goes the way of the ancient dinosaurs. So why are we still here? Well, we're smarter than the competition. We're very well suited to the Earth's environment right now. We've had our share of dumb luck. So far, our species hasn't had to face the catastrophe of a speeding asteroid.
Life, like roulette, is a game of chance.
But thanks to the greatest discoveries that we've just explored, the odds for our survival may have improved, because the more we understand about the origin and nature of life, the more we may be able to keep our streak alive.